This is Hidden Killers with Tony Bruschi.
We're going to dive into a case out of San Antonio, Texas. One that is as tragic as it is infuriating. It's a textbook example of what happens when an abuser refuses to let go. And instead of dealing with the emotions like a rational adult, they decide to ruin lives. This story centers around Martin Garcia, a 66-year-old man who just got sentenced to 45 years in prison for brutally murdering his ex-wife, Teresa Garcia. And when I say brutally, I mean he stabbed her 95 times. This wasn't just a, oops, did she fall on a knife? 95.
I can't even wrap my brain around that.
It all happened after learning she was moving out and had met someone new. Let that one sink in for a second. This wasn't some impulsive act of passion. You don't stab someone 95 times by accident. That's pure uncontrolled rage. The kind that had probably been bubbling under the surface for a little while in this house. Maybe a reason why she left, or attempted to. Let's rewind a bit and talk about their situation. Garcia and Teresa had been divorced for years, but were still living together. Most likely because of financial struggles. And while that setup might sound strange to some, it's actually pretty common, unfortunately. Sometimes people split up on paper but can't afford to go their separate ways immediately. But here's the thing. When one person in that situation is a known abuser, it's kind of a powder keg that's waiting to explode. And explode it did. The night of the murder, December 5th, 2023, it started like any other day, but by 11 p.m., Teresa was dead. That night, the San Antonio Police Department got a chilling 911 call from none other than Martin Garcia himself. Imagine the dispatcher picking up the phone and hearing this guy confess outright, I just killed my wife. I stabbed her to death. It's got to be a fun one.
Probably.
When officers arrived at the home on Channing Avenue, they found exactly what Garcia had described. Teresa was inside, lifeless, her body covered in stab wounds, 95 of them. The number is important because it tells you this wasn't a quick or even calculated killing. It was rage. He wanted to make sure that she suffered. Meanwhile, Garcia was outside with a weak attempt at a self-inflicted wrist wound. Say wrist wound 3 times fast.
I don't think I can.
Wrist wound, wrist wound, wrist wound. You got to think of it like as an R on wrist. Let's be real. This ain't some deep, serious wound meant to end his life. It's just enough to make it look like he felt bad about what he did, but not enough to actually take responsibility in the way that he deserved. Should have done a little bit better on that. Paramedics patched him up, and then he was off to jail. Years of control and abuse is what it all came down to. In court, the true scope of Garcia's abuse came out. Teresa's sons took the stand, giving heartbreaking victim impact statements. One of them said she didn't know how to escape. It tells you everything you need to know. She was trapped. The other son painted a picture of Garcia's controlling and possessive nature, recalling how he would say things like, if I can't have her, nobody can. Seems like a lovely guy. And those kids, I mean, they're adults, but there's not a lot you can do.
And that's the mentality a lot of people have.
Yeah.
And those people can get really dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
Because they're, he's really looking at her as a possession and something that he's controlling. That's not love. He doesn't love her.
No.
He wants to control her. And that's a very dangerous place to be in.
Yeah.
It's not just a woman. It could go the other way.
Oh, completely.
It's a very dangerous place.
And as those kids, if the person that is being abused, I don't know, I have no idea what the situation is here, but if they don't want to get out of it, there's not a lot you can do to force them.
And my guess is she wanted out of it.
Well, I don't know. I mean, if you're the
Yeah.
kids, and I don't know, I don't know. I don't know it, but I'm thinking if your mom, is being abused by someone, I think you'd say, hey, come stay with me until we can figure out a place for you.
Right.
You wouldn't just sit there and be like, oh, keep taking it, mom. I don't know. At least that's how I would handle it. But even if you do that, there's the whole, the victim that is so ingrained in that and is trauma bonded to their abuser that when you offer it, if they don't want to take it, they can't take it. And there's not a lot you can do to stop it. I mean,
And
unless,
who knows with the kids? They
yeah,
might be in situations where they don't have room for mom. They might be living in studios or dorms
if
or
your mom's
something.
being abused, get a fucking rollout, get a
I would
couch,
think
get a
so,
beanbag, do
Or,
something.
and another thing is they might not have realized the extent it was
Maybe.
if they have been out of the house for a while.
Well, and
Maybe the dad just snapped too. Maybe he hadn't historically been this level of
it sounds
dad.
like he has been to a certain extent,
Yeah.
but I don't know. It's just another one of those things. You're like, there's a lot of ways of intervening here, and then we see so many cases where why would somebody would have said something or seen something? They did, and nothing happened. And there's only so much you can do to intervene legally. You can't force them out. You can't do anything of that nature. And you need evidence of abuse, and you need someone to press charges against an abuser.
Mm-hmm.
And if that's not going to happen, because nobody wants to do it, it just continues, and eventually someone dies.
Yep.
There it is, the classic abuser mindset. For people like Garcia, it was never about love. It was all about control. The second Teresa found the strength to leave for good, that control was threatened, and he snapped. The courtroom in Garcia's pathetic excuse for an apology during his sentence, Garcia had the audacity to say this: I loved her very much. She was the only one I loved. I did what I did. I'm very sorry, but I loved her.
How?
Well,
How can you say you love somebody and do that to them? How can you say that?
that's the thing. They have a different definition of love. What love means to healthy individuals, adults, is not the same thing. A narcissistic abuser equates love with someone being under their control.
Yeah.
They are submitting to me. They are doing what I want them to do. When they don't, they still love them. But the only thing that love means is that they once submitted to that control, and I want her to come back and submit to that control, and I can do whatever the hell I want to her. That's not love. But to them, it is. So when they say, I loved her, not the same meaning.
Yeah. You're right. And especially after doing something so horrific,
Yeah.
because that's just absolutely losing control to stab someone that many times. You are so far out of control.
Love does
That
not.
in his
Yeah.
head, maybe that's how he's like, but I loved her. And that makes it somehow better to him.
It's how he's coping with it. It's how his
Yeah.
brain is
Yeah.
going to work to not make it so bad, even though it is. Love does not look like 95 stab wounds.
No.
It's not love. That's ownership. That's entitlement. And rage masquerading as affection. This is how Garcia treated someone he loved. I'd hate to see how he treated people he didn't care for.
Yeah, no kidding.
In the end, Garcia took a plea deal. He pled no contest in exchange for a maximum sentence of 45 years. Given his age, that's pretty much a life sentence. He's already spent 454 days in jail, but let's be honest, that's nothing compared to what he took from Teresa and her family. And while there's a certain satisfaction in knowing he'll spend the rest of his days locked up, it doesn't change the fact that Teresa should still be here. She was ready to move on, start a new chapter, maybe even find real happiness for the first time in years. Instead, her life was stolen by a man who thought he had the right to decide for her. The bigger picture? It's a brutal reminder that domestic violence isn't just about physical fights or nasty arguments. It's about power and control. And the moment a victim tries to break free is often the most dangerous time of all. It really, truly is in a case like this. Because you don't know what they're going to do. You don't know exactly what they're capable of doing sometimes. Sometimes they hide behind a very deceptive mask. And then you finally see it when you get fed up and say, I'm out. I'm not going to keep doing this anymore. You're not going to keep abusing me.
It is so sad.
Yeah.
Like, I just, and you just, a woman like her, I think she deserved happiness. Who knows why they were stuck together as long as they were, and it could be financial. I don't know. But my God, but I loved her. And so his idea of love is if I can't have her because I love her, no one else can.
Teresa's,
it's only fair.
Her sons knew for decades that Garcia was abusive. They saw the warning signs, but like so many victims, Teresa probably felt trapped, whether because of finances, fear, or the hope that things might get better one day. Surprise ending, things never get better with an abuser. If this story tells us anything, it's this. If someone is showing you red flags, believe them. If you're in danger, listen. And if you're in an abusive relationship, don't wait. Just get help. Get out before it's too late. They're not going to get better. Because for Teresa, the freedom came at the ultimate cost. And the worst part, it did not have to end this way for her. But that's how it went. Another story of a crazy person doing what they're going to do. And, thankfully this time not getting away with it.
It's just, and this is a lesson to anybody who, I think we've all done it in some relationship in our life. Said, and it might be when you're younger, maybe you've learned, maybe you're in that relationship right now. He'll change, or I think he can change, or if I only do this or this or this, these are the triggers, so I won't do those things. Well, and if you're in a relationship like that, it's really time to figure out a safe way to get out.
Well, and I think it's interesting too, because I think not necessarily generationally, but age-wise, where you're at when you're in your 20s and even somewhat of your 30s, your peers that you're talking to, your friends that you're talking to, they're very likely in similar boats that you are. And nobody wants to be the one with the worst relationship. So there's a lot of, hiding behind the veil of what's going on. And, it's great. Or maybe they tell you and you're like, well, at least I'm not that bad. At least my relationship isn't that bad. If you're doing that, if you're like saying, at least it's not that bad, you got a problem already.
And I think, too, a lot of people, you and I have both been in relationships like this. They will be that person you really, really like. And they can switch it back and forth. So when you're thinking, man, this has got to end. I can't deal with this shit anymore. Then that nice one comes along, the one that you fell in love with. And they come along again and you're like, oh, see, that's who I love. He really can be that way.
Yeah, no, they can't. They can act for
like
a little while.
The facade.
And it's funny because when you get to like your 40s and 50s, it's kind of like, no, they can't. It's fucking bullshit. Like, people change. No, they don't. It's like, but you're so negative thinking. No, I have experience. I have life reps. You do not. You're about to get some if you keep thinking that way, and you'll experience it all the hard way. But life will tell you this through experience, through the experience of everyone around you at that age. It's like, yeah, fuck that. And you're much more, if you're in a healthy mindset, you're much more apt to say, screw this, I'm out very quickly, rather than starting to just stay with it for decades. So usually at that time, if you have kids, it's kind of towards the end of that era. So that's not keeping you there. There's all sorts of things that keep people in horrible relationships. But I think the biggest thing is, and it's shocking, people don't identify it until it's too late. And so being aware, that's what they should teach in school. Let's do a little less, extreme math that you're never going to use. And let's talk more about this stuff. Let's teach kids, about abusive relationships. We don't do that. And then people fall into them. And without any, the parents should teach that. Have you seen the parents lately?
Oh my God.
They're like the example of what not to do, but they're saying, do what I do. And it's got to be taught somewhere. And if in schools, I don't know where else you could possibly, even get there.
The world of true crime never stops, and neither do we. Press subscribe now to get daily updates, in-depth analysis, and expert opinions from the Hidden Killers podcast and True Crime Today.